I'm the VP of Training, and I'm so excited for you guys to all be with us tonight virtually. I wanted to provide a couple league updates before we jump into tonight's program. The first is some upcoming trainings that we have. I want to make sure you're all aware of. On 10/8, we have the role of nonprofits in voting advocacy. So that's Thursday. It's going to be a great talk with a local nonprofit that helps empower nonprofits to talk to people about voting in a nonpartisan way and how we can go about that. Check out Digital Cheetah, the calendar. It's live. You can sign up. So I highly encourage that. I'll be there. And then we also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion training the week of 10/12. It's not on the calendar yet, but just wanted you guys to be aware of it. It's actually a new member training, so I hope there's lots of new members out there tonight. Thank you for coming, and welcome to the league. But it is going to be open to non-new members as well. And then the third is at the end of October, we have a night with Resolve New England. Resolve is a nonprofit that's been fighting for access to fertility and family planning. It's a great talk. They did it last year as well, so highly encourage everyone to join for that as well. Some other league events that are coming out, and definitely check out the Digital Cheetah calendar because these are just a few. We have our league read of how to be an anti-racist on 10/6. It's not too late to get your copy. I highly encourage it. You go online if physical copies aren't available. And that is on 10/6, as I said. And then on a lighter, more fun note, we have a bachelorette watch party on 10/13, which I highly recommend everyone join. If you're missing that social component with League, I'm not a bachelorette fan, but I still like being there to make fun of everything and talk about roses. So, all right. So I'm so excited to jump right in tonight. Amy Bucher has been a huge asset to the Junior League of Boston for many years. We're so happy that she's here tonight with us. She's currently the Vice President of Behavior Change Design at MadPow and author of the Rosenfield Media book, Engaged, Designing for Behavior Change. I can't wait. I've been waiting all month for this training, so I just want to jump right in to how we can use motivation psychology to be more effective leaders. So, Amy, take it away.
All right. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here talking to this group. I actually did a version of this training, I think it was 4 years ago now, and it was funny because when Caitlin asked me to do this, I went and looked back at my old slides, and I'm like, oh, I can't reuse these. I've done so much more work around this now that the stuff that I used to do has really changed. So that was kind of cool actually to see that working on this material, like how much it has evolved over the last several years. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Behavior Change Design at MadPow. So in my day job, I really work using the psychology of motivation to do research and then really come up with the so what of that research to design products and services that mostly are in the area of health and then financial services as well. But I'm essentially looking to help people change their behaviors by understanding what motivates them and then designing things that support that motivation. And one of the things I love about what I do is that this motivational psychology, this background, it really applies across all different types of fields. It's a universal thing because we as people carry our motivation with us into all of the situations and all of the activities that we do in life. So I'm going to talk today about how this same science can be applied to leadership and to the work that you all do as league volunteers and junior league leaders. Just a couple quick, I guess, housekeeping-ish sort of things. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the Zoom chat. And if you do have questions, and especially if it's like something's confusing or you need more information or more detail, I'm going to try to answer those as I go. So I won't be reading it carefully, but just try to catch my eye on the chat if there's something like that. We'll definitely have time at the end as well for additional questions, and especially things that are maybe, additional information or, that kind of thing. And I hope that there'll be some good conversation there. I know it's always a little hard with the virtual events. And then the other thing I do want to point out is that in my day job, I do a lot of work on digital products. And digital products are also something tangible. You can see them. You can take a screenshot of them. And so as I go through, I will use a lot of examples that come from those sorts of digital programs, but I'm going to try to emphasize how these same principles can also come to life in experiences, in relationships, and in conversations. So I just want to make sure that I'm saying that right out front, that just because I'm using these digital examples, it's not to say that it can only happen in a digital format. So the first point I want to make, and I think that you all know this just from your own experience, but junior league members are leaders, and you can think about the leadership that you have in multiple ways. So first of all, you're leaders to two different audiences. One is internally within the league, to your fellow league members, to the committees that you work on, and in some cases actually formally lead, but in other cases are participating as part of. And then the second is to the community, to the Boston community, to the community in the placements that you're working in, and to other volunteer groups that you might collaborate with. So we really can think of leadership as being something that's inward to the organization, but also outward to the community. And leaders, there's different types of leadership, and I think everybody in the league probably has experienced at least two of these and maybe eventually all three. So oftentimes the word leader makes people think of the formal leader, the person who has a position of authority, they have a title, they actually have formal control over a group and what happens, and maybe is, they're responsible for giving some sort of feedback to the people who are members of that group. And that's certainly true within the league. If you are, chair of a committee, or if you're, on the board, something like that, that's a formal leadership position. And only some people have those at any given time. However, most people are informal leaders, and that is just that we influence the other people around us, even when we don't have formal power over them. I'll talk a lot about this, but human beings, I think we all know just from being human beings, we're super social. We really pay a lot of attention to the people around us and the way that they're behaving and the cues they give us. And so we influence each other all the time just by being in a group together. So that's an informal leadership. And then citizen leader is something I think most women in the junior league aspire to be. And that is, again, you don't have a formal position of authority necessarily as a citizen leader, but you are actively trying to influence others. And just by nature of the volunteer experience, that makes you a citizen leader. You wouldn't have joined the junior league if you didn't want to try to exert that sort of leadership. And so as I talk through the psychology of motivation, I'd like you to think about how it might come to life across all three of these domains of leadership. So your formal roles, your informal relationships with each other, and then the ways in which you're actually trying to influence people through your volunteer work and through your other interactions. So motivation, I like to define it up front. It's a word that we use all the time in normal day-to-day conversation, but in psychology, it has a more precise meaning. So just to kind of hone in on that, and this is a pithy way to put it, but I really like it because it captures the important stuff. It's desire with velocity. So it's not just wanting, it's wanting to do something. It always takes an object. There's a behavior that is the focus of motivation. And whenever I do research, that's always one of the first things that I'm doing is I'm trying to find what are the behaviors that I'm trying to get people to do, because then I can peel back out and think about, all right, given this behavior, what interests them in doing it or not, and how can I understand the quality of that motivation? One of the things that I've really taken away from all of my years of involvement with the league is that there are two main motivations for women to join the league. And I'm sure people can guess what they are. If you want to throw a guess in the chat box really quickly, that would be, it's probably not going to be that interesting because I feel like everybody knows what they are, but what are the things that really motivate women to join the junior league? Yeah, Megan got it right away for her first comment. I knew it wasn't much of a mystery. So really it's social connections and being part of a community of women. That's a huge driver. And then the other one is volunteerism and contributing to the betterment of society. And I wanted to put these out here, these being the two main behaviors, the two main things that people want to do, those targets of motivation for junior leaguers, because as we talk through the different principles of how motivation works and how we create the experiences that foster it for people, these are the sorts of things that we're going to keep in mind around connecting people to each other, creating that community, and around creating the conditions where people can contribute to society and be a good volunteer. Yeah, and getting out on a weeknight during a snow day, absolutely. That's like a sub-bullet under social connections for sure. So a really important thing as well when you think about motivation from a psychological perspective that is different from the way a lot of people talk about it in real, daily life is that motivation isn't something we give to other people. So we use motivate a lot of times as a verb where like I motivated her or my coach really motivated me. But from a psychological perspective, we can't do that. And I'll share why in a moment. But really what motivation is it's something that lives within a person. And someone who's a leader who's helping to cultivate that motivation is helping the person connect with it. They're helping them think about it, define it, find it, but they're not providing it. So it's kind of an important thing because motivation is extremely personal. The way that it shows up for any individual looks a little bit different. And so there is a little bit of that digging deep and that one-to-one connection that often needs to happen to be really motivational for someone. So I like to put that out there, and it is definitely different from the way that we talk about it. It's not the sort of thing that's so different that it upsets me when I see it on Instagram, but it's important, I think, for purposes of thinking about using the theory of motivation for leadership. So the specific theory of motivation that I work with is called the self-determination theory of motivation. And most people who have taken an intro psych course are actually familiar with at least part of this theory. So this theory is a little over 40 years old, and it comes out of the University of Rochester in New York, where there are two psychologists, DC and Ryan. A lot of people know those names if you've taken a psych course. And the finding that most people know from DC and Ryan is this idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So things that motivate you from outside yourself, that's extrinsic, and things that motivate you from inside yourself, that's intrinsic. And for most people who haven't studied psychology beyond, a couple books or maybe one or two classes, that's where it stops. But in reality, it's a really rich and deep research tradition, and there's a lot more detail behind the science of motivation that has grown out of there. And one of the reasons I really like this theory, by the way, is because it has such a rich community of scholars around it. So they're very active to this day. They publish frequently, and that, as a professional, that gives me a lot of confidence that there's validity behind this approach and that we're constantly learning and improving it and applying it to new spaces. So a key learning from the self-determination theory of motivation is an idea of motivational quality, that we're not just going to talk about people having high motivation or low motivation, but we're going to talk about the source of that motivation. And so this is where that intrinsic, extrinsic thing comes from. But you can see there's more types, and they're actually ordered on this slide from I'm not going to say the weakest, the least long-lasting, the least powerful, to the most long-lasting, the most sustaining. And a lot of the work I do and the work that the Junior League does as well, we're really interested in sustained motivation. We're really most of the time not asking people to do something only once. We're asking them to do something repeatedly. So you want people in your placements to be showing up to every volunteer session, energized and ready to give their best and really connect with the girls that they're serving, for example. It's not a one-time behavior. So if you look at the continuum, at the very end, this is another thing that doesn't get talked about sometimes, there's amotivated. So there's a portion of people who aren't interested in doing a certain behavior. And typically my professional recommendation is leave them alone. They're just not ready. So you can create the circumstances, you can market to them essentially and create an appealing case for why they might want to do a behavior. But if they're not interested, you're really not going to get, full-hearted participation in that behavior right now. So I would say leave them alone. And with a position like being in the Junior League as a citizen leader, you're probably not going to encounter a lot of these people, at least not among other Junior League members, because most women have joined because if they're interested in it, they want to do it. It takes some effort for them to become a member. So they are there with enthusiasm. You might encounter it perhaps in a community placement where you have someone whose, parents sign them up for kids in the kitchen and they don't really want to be there. And unfortunately, your job is really to keep creating that condition of appeal, but knowing that it's going to be really hard to get them to be enthusiastic right away. It's a long road. External motivation, this is that extrinsic motivation that I just mentioned. This comes entirely from outside of the person. And it could be a reward or a punishment. It could be a thing that a lot of people experience through their health insurance, especially if they get it through their work, is when you get paid once a year or twice a year to do one of those really long surveys online about all your health stuff. And maybe you have to go get a blood test and a couple other things like that. So that's a really common extrinsic motivator that you might see in real life. It could also be someone else who's punishing you or encouraging you in more of a negative way. So I'm going to nag you not to do that. You shouldn't be smoking. That's also external. And then introjected is when people internalize that. And typically the way that you can detect that is if they talk about things they should do. Oh, I really should go home and do the homework, that kind of thing. Where it's not they're not doing it for their own reason. They're doing it because they know there's some expectation that they should. The thing about these forms of motivation, which are called controlled, is that they're really vulnerable to obstacles. So if the conditions make it easy for someone to not do the behavior, if they have a convenient excuse, they're more likely to take it because their reason for being motivated to do the behavior is flimsy. It doesn't survive those things. So what we're really looking for are these autonomous forms of motivation that are more personal and internal to people. And I personally find them a little bit confusingly named because identified is not the one that means identity, but identified is when you have goals that you really value and you recognize that a behavior is going to help you achieve those. So you might think about something like, I have a goal to make Boston a better place to live. And a way to achieve that would be to volunteer with an organization like the Junior League. Integrated is when doing it is part of who you are. So this is the identity one. And by the way, I never use the names of these if I don't have the slides in front of me because I always get confused on that particular one. But this is when people think of themselves a certain way. You know, I'm a person who gives back. I'm a person who's a good member of my community. And so it's really important to me to be in this volunteer role and to give my time and to give my talents to it. And then the last one here is intrinsic. And again, this is one that people tend to have heard of. And it's when you're doing something just because it's pleasurable. You enjoy it for its own sake, and there doesn't necessarily need to be a deeper reason for it. So when you think about identified, think about goals and helping people to think about what their goals are. And when you think about integrated, it's about helping people think about their values and their sense of self. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about how we help people think about these things. I actually have some specific tools and exercises that you can use because it's not an easy thing. Most of us haven't spent the time, you know, thinking about, oh, what are my deepest values? Like we kind of know it when we see it, but it's really important to spend some time thinking about it, be able to articulate it, be able to put some parameters around it. So this motivational quality matters. This is a study that it's about 6 years old now. The New York Times did a big write-up on it around when it came out, if you're interested in reading about it in layperson's language. But it was really interesting because the researchers had an opportunity to survey an incoming college class at West Point, which is the US, it's the military academy for Army. So it's a really prestigious school, like it's academically rigorous. They have good sports teams, all that stuff, you know, like all the stuff that you might want in a college. And it's also free to go to because you're committing to serve at least 5 years in the US Army if you attend. So they had the opportunity to survey incoming cadets and say, why is it you're interested in going to West Point? And then they were able to follow up with them in the 10 years afterwards. So they were able to basically see, you know, they graduate at 4 years and then their 5 years of service takes them to 9 years. And then they followed up 1 year after that and said, where are you now? And they found that people who had mostly intrinsic reasons for going. So these were reasons like, it's really important to me to get a good education. The community at West Point is really important to me. I consider myself patriotic and this is a way to serve my country, like those kinds of things. They were more likely to become an officer, so they got promoted. They were more likely to be promoted early, and then they were more likely to stay. They would still be in the military at that 10-year point. So their mandatory service ends at the 9-year point, and they're still in at 10. So they're sticking with it longer. And then mostly extrinsic are people who focused on things like, well, it's free, which is a huge draw, like no doubt, especially given what college costs. But those were their primary drivers, the biggest reasons for going. And they had the opposite pattern. They were more likely to have left as soon as they were able to. The really interesting thing here, and you may have picked up on this as implicit, is most people have more than one reason for doing something. I'll give a personal example that I think most of us probably share. I really, really like my job. But if they weren't paying me, I probably wouldn't show up there every day. So that's an example of something a lot of people do and feel passionate about, like feel really, motivated about to do, but also have these extrinsic motivators. So it's a little bit about the balance. And what they found here is that people who had the mixed motivations for the West Point situation looked a lot like the mostly extrinsic. And so what I take away from this is that we have an opportunity as leaders to help people connect with those autonomous forms of motivation, the more internal personal ones, and hopefully get them towards those better outcomes, that sticking with it, the being more engaged, and the being more successful at their performance. So the good news is psychology of motivation talks about how. Um, Motivating experiences tend to support three basic psychological needs. And one of the things, again, I love about this theory of self-determination theory is that they have done research using it all around the world across different cultures and different contexts. There are a lot of psychology approaches that have, it's really common to do your research with college students in the US because that's a population that's readily available for doing studies. Because this theory has such a community and so many years behind it, they've really done research all around the world, different age groups, different contexts, and they found that this holds pretty true in every context, which is kind of amazing. Like, you don't see that a lot. So the three basic psychological needs that you see in all people are autonomy, so the need to make your own meaningful choices for yourself. And I'll talk a little bit about this, but it's really, that word meaningful is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. So it's not necessarily about being able to make every single choice. It's about being able to make the big choices. Competence, so looking around the world and seeing, are you learning, growing, and succeeding? And then relatedness, feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself, whether it's a relationship with a small group of people or one other person, or whether it's feeling like you're part of a community. And I see a question here, were mixed also less likely to stay on? Yes, they were. And I think it's because in the sample, the balance was still heavily towards the extrinsic, but yes. So the goal from the military study would be to try to nudge people as much as possible towards more of those intrinsic reasons and fewer of the extrinsic reasons. So people ask themselves when they're engaging in any kind of experience or behavior, and you may do this explicitly or you may do it implicitly, but you are doing this to some extent. This is how people judge whether this is a good experience for them. Do my choices matter? And that's autonomy. Does my work make a difference? And do I belong? Is this a place where I'm part of a community? Motivational leaders, what they're really doing is they're helping people find ways to say yes to these three questions. So what I'd like to think about is, how as leaders can we design motivating experiences? There's a question about cultural expectations. So I'm just going to go quickly back here because there is one really interesting finding about cultures. In some Eastern cultures where there's more of a collectivist approach, so this is very much oversimplifying, but think Asian cultures, they find that autonomy can actually take on more of a family unit approach. So it's, if I'm part of a family unit and someone in that family unit makes a really important decision that affects me, I feel that same sense of autonomy support as if in a Western culture I'd made it for myself. So definitely oversimplifying a bit, but that is the one where you see a little bit of cultural difference. And I think it probably is due to some extent to cultural expectations. The specific way all of these needs get supported can vary a lot depending on the behavior that you're doing, the type of medium that you're working in. So I mentioned before, I'm going to show a lot of digital stuff, and things show up a certain way in digital where it doesn't make sense to have it show up in a conversation or in a group activity. But the idea is that these are features that are designed to do these three things, to support these three needs. All right, so I'm gonna talk first here about that first thing that I mentioned, which is really helping people to connect to what matters to them, because that is the heart of autonomous forms of motivation. And the more that I've done this work, the more that I've realized it's in some ways just the hardest part, because as much as we know ourselves, and I think most of us can pretty easily reject things that don't fit our values or our identity or our goals, it's a lot harder to do the positive piece of it and say, yes, this is me. Here's my elevator pitch about who I am and what matters most, especially when you want it to get to that level of specificity where it really drives you through hard times. So there are some things that we can do as leaders to help people get there. The first is helping people think about their goals and priorities. And I wanted to use the image of the mountain because a really important tactic that undercuts a lot of the behavior change work I do is taking these big, sometimes this is a real phrase, big, hairy, audacious goal, the BHAG. I don't use it a lot because it doesn't sound super flattering, but the big, hairy, audacious goal is sort of like the big thing that I want to achieve. Like on my deathbed, this is the thing that I want to have accomplished. And typically that goal, as much as it might be motivating, is also intimidating. The things that are really inspiring are often also really hard, and they're not things that people will achieve quickly. And so part of the process is to break it down into milestones along the way, to figure out, how can I take this big thing and make it into smaller steps that are much more achievable, that don't make me feel afraid, that, don't make me feel like I might not be good enough, but instead inspire me and energize me to take those steps. A metaphor that I really like around this is the idea, and you may have heard this, there's this whole like obviously fake story that is written around it about like a college professor brings all these materials into the classroom, and it's stones and pebbles and sand in a jar, and wants students to cram them in there. And, they can't do it. But the trick is to put the stones in first, the largest things. So the metaphor here is that you make room for the biggest goals in your life first, the things that really, really matter. And then around them, you fit the smaller goals, the things that perhaps are important to you, but don't take precedence over those bigger goals. So if you're defining your way up the mountain, any of those, wayfinders along the way would be the stones that you make sure you have room for in your jar. And then the smaller things that you have to take care of along the way maybe get a lower priority so that you can fit all of the things into your jar. It's a way to think about what's meaningful to you, is to ask yourself, is this activity that I'm about to do, is this a stone? Is it a pebble? Is it sand? Is it something that's actually pretty minor? And it would be nice if it fit in all the cracks left behind the important stuff, but if it doesn't, is it really a big deal? I also recently heard a metaphor that I really like around this about juggling, dropping balls. We've all heard the phrase like dropping balls. She's dropped the ball. And thinking about the balls that you're juggling in your life as being made of either plastic or glass. And it's okay to drop a plastic ball. It's going to bounce and roll away, and you can go pick it up later on when you have a free hand. It's not okay to drop a glass ball. And so think about what in your life is a glass ball and what is a plastic ball. And don't feel guilty when you have to drop the plastic balls, because most of us can't juggle everything all the time. And then I mentioned I have some specific tools here. So why do you want to do it? You've got these goals. Okay, what's behind them? What's that identity? What is the value system that's driving it? Where I work a lot in digital is super scalable, and you can collect a lot of data from people. And with the help of algorithms, and now machine learning is becoming really common. Like I've had the opportunity to work with some very sophisticated programming on the back end, and we can really get very personal with technology as a result. But not always. Sometimes we're working in lower tech or lower fi media. And one of the things that we can do is look at research on universal values. So there are multiple different studies that break the number of universal values down into different numbers. I've seen it as few as 4, as many as 20. This is just one model that comes from Schwartz, the Schwartz theory of basic values. So it's one of the more common ones. But what I do sometimes when I'm building a program where I won't actually get to talk one-on-one with somebody and ask them what they value is I'll kind of take a stab in the dark based on what research has shown a lot of people value. And so what we can see here is, self-transcendence, these ideas of benevolence and universalism. This is really about being part of a community. I feel connected to other people, and I want to do things that are good for others. Conservation is more about an inward sort of focus. I want to take care of myself and the people close to me. I want to be independent and perhaps thrive in that more isolated kind of sense with my unit. Self-enhancement is really about enjoyment and pleasure. And then openness to change is about learning and growth. And so we can think about those sorts of things. And depending on what you're working on, I mean, if you're thinking about something like designing a placement activity, you can think about, okay, in what ways might openness to change show up in the girls who are participating in this without knowing anything else about them? Because research says very likely a lot of the girls in the group will have some form of those values. But if you do have the opportunity to do activities, there's a set of really fun ones that I've had the opportunity to use. And they're about imagining a new reality. So these are creative activities. I have, not by choice, had the opportunity a few times in my career to sit down and go through these workshops where you're really trying to articulate who you are and what matters to you. And I struggle a lot with that. I know some people are good at that, and they're able to do things like journal and kind of find themselves and come up with a way to think about themselves, but it's never been my style. And so these sorts of things have been more helpful for me, where you're doing something that comes in sideways. It's a little more creative, a little more goofy, but it helps you understand something about yourself. And so, I've seen drawing your 100th birthday card. What would you want someone to say to you on your 100th birthday, like that you've achieved? And then on the flip side, create your epitaph. You've passed away. What do you hope people remember you for? Writing a love letter to your favorite thing is actually one I use a lot in my work when we do research with people, and it's really revealing. It's not even about what you choose, but the reasons that you come up with for why you love something or why you hate it. Sometimes people, we ask them to do a love letter and it turns into this like venomous breakup letter, but it tells you a lot, the reasons that they choose for why they love or don't love this thing. And then this last one is really about almost a sliding doors sort of situation. So what is your story now, but then what could it be? And when you have those two stories next to each other, we're going to think about what is the change that happened that let story A become story B. And these are things that you can do with other people as well. If you wanted to actually have a session with, a group of other people and go through some of these sorts of exercises, they really lend themselves to working together in a group and discussing. You have to be vulnerable with each other, which is sometimes a turnoff, but I think in a position of leadership, and especially in a group where your fellow members are seeking community, it could also fit really well. This one I like a lot too, and I will, when I'm doing research interviews with people, I'll sometimes ask them some of these questions. What's on your cell phone or computer desktop? Like what did you put around you in the workspace or wherever you're spending most of your time? If you still carry a wallet, and I say that I do have a wallet, but it's like I haven't left the house in 6 months, so I feel like I don't. But what do you keep in it? Like, do you keep photographs? Do you keep any mementos? I have a couple of old concert tickets in mine, and they say something about what I value. And in my case, it's not about the music, it's about the memories I have of going with my friends and having these really great nights out, enjoying something that we all love. So these sorts of things, we don't necessarily put a lot of thought into choosing them, but often, again, they're really revealing about who we are and what we value. And then this last one is a little bit more structured, but I personally find it really helpful. It's a survey called Values in Action, and it comes from the Center for Positive Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. So if you study psychology, you might have heard of Marty Seligman. He's one of the primary authors of this survey. And it's based on a ton of data. It's probably about 15, 20 years worth of data at this point. It's free online. You go through it and it tells you what your top 5 or 6 character strengths are. And I included the screenshot of Happify because Happify is actually built on the Values in Action survey. So that's the data that they, you take the survey through Happify, but then it's just using that survey. And you actually have to pay to see all of your signature strengths through Happify, but it's free if you go to the Values in Action site. So recommend doing that. And it's something that I actually ended up doing for myself, even though I'd taken it before at the beginning of the pandemic, because I was struggling a lot, which I think most people were. A lot of the things that I love to do were suddenly not available to me. And one of the things that was really helpful to me is, these are actually my results here. And my top character strength is love of learning. And I decided to really lean into that and try to think about how, in my much smaller world, how can I still learn things? And so for the first few months of pandemic, I spent a lot of time, walking around my neighborhood and going down side streets that I'd never gone down before, cooking new recipes, like let's watch something on Netflix that we would never watch, like just the first thing that comes up, let's put it on. And I framed them to myself as being a way to learn. And it really helped me psychologically to feel like, even though I wasn't doing the things that I love to do, I was still doing them in service of something that matters a lot to me. And so I can't recommend doing the survey highly enough. And I find it's really helpful whenever I need to do something where motivation really comes into play. Supporting autonomy. And I see a question coming through about sharing the slides. I'm happy to do that. I can PDF them and then do the optimized PDF so the file size is reasonable. Otherwise, it's like ridiculous. But I can do those and share them with Caitlin. So this is the part where I mentioned that motivational experiences support those 3 basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And they do that in a lot of different ways. So I'm basically going to show you multiple different tactics you can use to support each of those basic psychological needs. But understand that, your toolkit may not include all of these. It may include variations on some of them. It may include tools that I don't mention, either because I'm not aware of them or because maybe they haven't been created yet. This is, still an in-process area of research and design. And I almost took out the first one here, but it is really important. I almost took it out because in a volunteer organization, it's not as relevant, but it's to minimize external pressure. So I mentioned, if you have employer provided health insurance, you're probably familiar with some sort of financial incentive to provide mega data every year. And as a person who designs those kinds of things, it drives me crazy, because what happens is people perform to the reward. They, they do whatever they need to do to get that discount, to get that money, and then they don't do any more. And theoretically, with all of those workplace health programs, you want people to do more. You're not just looking to collect the data. You're hoping that they also make improvements in their health. And from an employer perspective, it's because you want them to spend less money on healthcare over the long run, right? You want them to be healthier so they don't need to use the hospital as much. They don't need to use the benefits as much. But these incentive structures really just get people to perform toward the reward. So what I recommend when I work with these clients, knowing that they're never going to just remove the reward, is that first of all, they try to keep the rewards smaller. If it's too much, it's really counterproductive. The bigger the reward is, the more people fixate on it. And there's also an ethical issue there, in that if the reward is big enough, people can't say no to it. So you are essentially coercing them. Even though you may say like, well, we're rewarding them, they get to walk away with $500 for doing this. Yeah, but at what cost? They didn't really have the opportunity to say no. And one of the ethical principles at the heart of human subjects research is that you don't coerce people. You really give them the freedom to say yes or no and participate. So keeping those reward amounts fairly small, tying them to meaningful behaviors. So like I said, we do want to collect people's data because it helps you understand what your population looks like and what types of things you might want to put out there in that employer health context. But you don't just want to collect the data. You want people to actually do things to get healthier. And so some of the more successful incentive schemes I've seen have included an additional component where it's like, you give us your data, and then maybe we use an algorithm to identify like one thing you could do a little better, and you get your reward when you do that too. That's better than just rewarding for the data collection, because now you're at least making sure that there's a meaningful behavior that's tied into that reward. And then the third one is considering non-financial rewards when possible, and especially ones that reinforce your goals. So those employer health plans, it's like, give people free gym memberships. Like if you want them exercising, give them free gym memberships, or, really cool weights or something to have at home. Or identity reinforcing is a good one too. So even things like having junior league t-shirts when you're participating in, a special volunteer event, it helps, it feels like a reward, like it's cool to get a free t-shirt. And especially if it's a stylish looking one, and it helps people feel like they're part of the bigger group. So trying to avoid rewards, but if you have to use them, being creative and thoughtful about what you're rewarding. I really like this one just because it's got some data behind it, but sharing rules of engagement, letting people know up front what you're asking of them and then following through on that. And the particular example I use here is from a group called ME Solutions that was acquired and then dissolved. So they don't, if you want to Google this, they were acquired by Wolters Kluwer. And I believe you can still find this case study under the Wolters Kluwer research website. But ME used to make these really cool little animated videos for people who were going to undergo a medical procedure that showed them what was going to happen, basically so they could prepare and so they would be less afraid and they would follow through with any kind of aftercare or preparation they needed to do. And the video about a colonoscopy that they showed people, they found that when they showed it to people, they actually needed less sedation medication. Like that blows my mind. And the procedure happened more quickly. This is someone who's, you get knocked out during this procedure. So it's not like the person was actively helping it happen more quickly during, but because they felt prepared, because they took the steps necessary to be prepared, the procedure actually went more quickly and more smoothly. And they rated themselves as 11% more knowledgeable, which is, always good if you can benefit the person who's participating too. I like this particular case study, but the bigger point is that when you're asking somebody to participate in something, building trust means letting them know what they're agreeing to, even if it includes something that's hard or something that they might not like. People will do hard things if they believe it's worthwhile. And if they have the opportunity to prepare themselves and sort of know going in that it's going to be difficult, that's usually okay. But where you lose people is when you pretend that it's going to be easy, or you just omit that something will be that difficult. They encounter it in the situation, especially if they realize that you probably knew and didn't share it. Now you violated trust, and it's really, really hard to win it back. So that's the bigger point I'd like to take away from there. And I think It's a really important one for leaders, because oftentimes we are asking people to participate in things that may feel hard, whether it's asking them to raise a certain dollar amount in fundraising. Most people don't enjoy making the ask, but it's a really important part of being a successful volunteer. Sometimes the things in community placements can be really difficult as well. And again, knowing that, being prepared for it, can really help you be successful and feel good on the other end. What if scenarios are a way to help people understand when a choice might be meaningful or not. The screenshot on the left here looks it is old school actually. So it's called the Snowball debt calculator. It's just a tricked out Excel spreadsheet, and you can download it online. I actually used this to pay off my own student loans, which I had a lot of. But you essentially put in your various amounts of debt, and you can play around with different what if scenarios and figure out, it's not just the most efficient way. There is usually like one most efficient way to pay off your debt, but you can think about things like making yourself have fewer loans. So one of the things I did was I had a small loan that had less interest rate. So it didn't really make sense from a total dollars perspective to pay off first, but I really, really wanted the win. I wanted to feel like I was making progress. And so the spreadsheet let me figure out, how do I pay that one off first and then tackle the others? So it helps you think about what behaviors might be meaningful and how to kind of order the different things you might do. And then on the right is a tool that is more for health, where it's a cardiovascular risk calculator. And a thing that you see a lot in healthcare work is that patients, especially patients who are ill, who have a significant chronic condition or diagnosis, they're asked to do a lot of things. Like they come in and it's like, you got to take the medication, you've got to eat differently, and you've got to work out differently, and you're going to be sleeping with equipment, and so on and so forth. And it's really, really hard for people to make all of those changes at once. And so this sort of tool can help people think about, where are the most meaningful changes? What are the things that I absolutely have to do in order to, have better outcomes? Letting people pick their goals. This is a huge one. Like, why are you even doing this thing? Let's not impose goals on people. And I included Noom here. So Pacifica, I actually should have updated this. It's been acquired and now it's called Sanvello, but it is a meditation and mindfulness app. And it does a nice job during onboarding at helping people think about why they might want to gain these skills. Like, what are the specific stressors in your life you're trying to help with? Noom does a really nice job in onboarding as well, with helping people think about their goals. And they actually ask a whole series of questions that almost feels irritating when you're joining Noom. And by the way, one of the reasons I know this, when I was writing my book, I took something like 2,000 screenshots of different apps. I downloaded like everything I could get my hands on and actually used all of them as far as I could, so that I would have a sense of what was out in the market. And so I can tell you from onboarding to Noom that it actually does feel a little irritating, where they're like, no, really, why do you want to do this? You told us this was your goal, but let's go one level deeper. But at the end of it, I have to say, I had a better sense of why I might want to participate in the program. And they do a nice job of reminding you of that as you participate. And then the third one here is called Kumanu, or the app is purposeful and the company is called Kumanu. And I have a little bit of a personal tie to this, because the founder of this company, Vic Strucker, founded a company that I worked for many years. And so it was really from him that I started to learn some of these tactics around identifying what's really important to you and how to help people put those at the center of their experience. But this app does a nice job at helping people identify what's important to them and then making decisions throughout the day that support those values. So that's the second piece that you don't see there. A thing that you can do verbally, and this takes a little bit of practice, but it can be super effective, is value consistent framing. So reminding somebody of the type of person they are, and then inviting them to think about how their behaviors might support that or not. And you can see even in that description why that is a tricky thing that can be hard for people to do. And there's certain topics where I feel comfortable doing this and other topics where I don't. But one of my colleagues who was especially excellent at this used to always talk about quitting smoking. And he would go into his spiel and he'd be like, I'm watching you and you are a great parent. Like, it is clear that you just put your kids front and center. And I see you make sure that at the end of every day, you have time to go out in the yard and play with them and spend time with them. And I just don't get why you can't quit smoking when that's gonna, make it hard for you to do this thing that you love so much. He goes out, he's like so compelling, and I'm like, well, he's not even talking about me. I'm like, oh my God, I'll quit. I'm sorry. That's the basic idea. There are much lower key ways to do this. I will, like in my role at work, a thing that I've done when I'm giving feedback to somebody, you know, I know that you're a person who really cares a lot about the quality of your work and how detail oriented it is. I was a little surprised to see this from you. Can you talk to me about it? Um, it invites a conversation where you're basically saying up front, I see something about you that's positive that I respect, and I need you to help me understand why this behavior isn't what it should be. However, this is one of my favorite things. This is a tactic that I think marketers have caught on to. Not I think, I know marketers have caught on to, and they are badly misusing it. So I collect these. You've all seen these pop-ups on websites when you try to leave that ask you to sign up for the newsletter, and there's the passive aggressive rejection at the bottom. And that this is what it's trying to do. It's trying to get you to think that signing up for their newsletter is going to support your values. And it's not, it's bull, and people have caught on to it. So I have several of these, starting with the least ridiculous from Ann Taylor. No thanks, I prefer to pay full price. No one does. I like to lose money. This is Wayfair. I reject my free issue of Runner's World. I love this one from Jezebel. I extremely hate fun and drama. I just like this one because I don't even know what it means. I don't want to run wild. It's a trail running magazine, but like, okay. And then this one, I'm sorry, this one has poor resolution because it is my absolute favorite. From a company called MyMedic, no, I don't want to stay alive. And this is to join their marketing, their email newsletter. Like, it is not going to save your life whatsoever. There are some really interesting blog posts and things out there from people with behavior science expertise that make a strong case that these don't work. And it just cracks me up every time I see them, because I know that it's like this marketer caught on to this one nugget from motivational science and they're using it. So if you see any of these that make you laugh, I would very much invite you to share them with me. Translating value into actions, that's not an easy thing for people to do. And so if you're able to do that, through conversation or through, in this case, this is an app that helps people invest their money. It's called Stash Invest. It's intended for people who don't have a lot of investment experience. So they may not know the basics of how to pick a fund to invest in. And it asks you to pick some things that you value. It's a weird little hodgepodge here because some of them are causes or ideals. So things like the environment or social responsibility. And some of them are like companies like Apple and Facebook. But either way, when you tell it what matters to you, it recommends a mix of investments that help support those values. And you're seeing this more and more now. I do a fair amount of work in financial services around supporting different types of behaviors, usually helping people prepare for retirement. And more you're seeing opportunities for people to say, like, I really don't want to invest in fossil fuels, indirectly through my 401k, that kind of thing. And making it more apparent to people how these everyday choices that we make actually either support or don't support our values, which isn't always clear to people. Sometimes there is I put right choice here in quotes, guiding people to the right choice. In this case, it's the right choice because it's what the company wants. This is an older screenshot because I haven't found anything more recent that does it quite this blatantly, but you do see with visual design often making the choice that the company would like you to make is more visually appealing and it is more prominent in your view. So it's really emphasizing the benefits over the non-preferred choice. The basic or free version here, isn't giving you all of these additional pieces of functionality, and it's a much more appealing visual design. They did a lot of things here to make it pop and catch your eye and make the button just more appealing. One thing I've noticed recently I occasionally will make a political donation and then immediately you get put on someone's newsletter and immediately I unsubscribe. And when you go to that page to confirm the unsubscribe, one of the things that they often do is they make the yes button red and the no button green. And the reason they do that is because we are trained in the American culture to think that green means good and red means bad. And so it's a way to try to guide people to what they think is the right choice. And that's what we would call a dark pattern in design because it is not empowering you to do what you actually want to do. An example that is not a dark pattern that I love, and you may have seen this before, is making the right behavior truly more appealing to people. So this is from a subway station in Norway, in Oslo, and it was actually set up by an agency that Volkswagen owns now, but they made the staircase into a working piano. So when you walked up and down it, you heard the notes play. And they found that in the time when this installation was there, people, I don't remember the exact stats offhand, but the people who use the stairs, it was many, many, many more than normally do. And so if you're trying to encourage a behavior like using the stairs, is there a way that you can make it fun, that you can make it appealing, that you're not taking the choice away from people, but you're changing the balance of what they choose? So I really like this example, and it is not a dark pattern because it's not tricking people into staying onto your newsletter. I like, and I don't know if this is in place this year, but one of the things I really liked over the last few years in the league that I think is a great example of doing this are the different sorts of models of types of members who might be in the league, and thinking about flexibility and requirements to meet their various needs so that they can all succeed in the goal of being a highly contributing league member, but get to that goal in ways that work for their style and their preferences. And so I was digging through some of my materials in the most recent set I had. I don't know if these are accurate, so forgive me if they're not. But, Promotion Polly, your member who really loves, trainings and fund development, is maybe really interested in how her participation in the league might support her career growth. And this is someone who can heavily, leverage maybe a development placement and going to trainings as a way to get her points. Then you might have Volunteer Valerie, who just loves volunteering in the community and wants to spend the bulk of her time there. And Mommy Margot, who right now is at a point in her life where she really needs flexibility. She's got young children, maybe she's balancing a job with that. And so she needs to be able to pick and choose as she goes. This model is a really great way to support people's autonomy. And, I think it's awesome that it was implemented. So I wanted to give a shout out to that. A few questions that I would invite you to reflect on as leaders in supporting autonomy is, how do you give members a sense of choice and ownership? If you're a chair of a placement, are there ways that you can let members make choices, the members on your placement make choices that influence their experience, but ladder up to the bigger goals that you have? Or it may not be the members in the league, it might be the people participating in the placement, the girls in the placement. Are there ways that they can shape their experience? A few years ago, I had an opportunity to sit in on a session of learning circles really early in the year, and they were doing an around the world curriculum where they all drew their own passports. And it was great because they had this opportunity to really stamp their own identity onto this document that was going to oversee their whole experience for the rest of the year. And I mean, they were just so excited, and you could really see how they felt empowered to choose what their experience would be like. Making commitments and options clear for both members and prospective members. So this gets in a little bit into that rules of engagement thing, letting people know what will be expected to them and giving them time and support to plan for how they're going to do that. And then, how do you make league mission consistent behaviors appealing and rewarding for people to choose? And I will say, listening to Caitlin talk about the upcoming events and trainings at the beginning of this session, that's a great example. Like, there's a whole variety of different opportunities that might appeal to people of different interests and backgrounds. Maybe some of the things you want to do and others you don't, but because there's such a mix available, like, that gives people the opportunity to express themselves and make an identity affirming choice in how they participate. I'm just looking at the questions quickly here. And there's a question about, do you think this has been part of a problem with the prolonged shutdown? And yeah, I do actually. I wrote a piece for, there's a website called People Science. The guy who wrote the foreword of my book runs it, actually. So we had a little quid pro quo, like he wrote something for me, I wrote something for him, but about how this theory particularly could be used to reshape people's shutdown experiences. And I wrote it early in the shutdown, and I have to say, I think that over time, this is why it's so hard for people, because we don't feel like we have the choices we're used to. We don't have the opportunity to get out in the world and like do things and see the response to it that we normally do. And our social relationships they're different. I'll in some cases they're made a lot harder or damaged. In some cases, it's easier to be closer to some people, but it's a lot of change at these really fundamental levels of what matters to people and what keeps them motivated. So I absolutely think that this has been a problem with prolonged shutdown. And, when I mentioned before that early on, I took that values and action survey, and for my own shutdown experience, that was kind of part of what was on my mind. Like, oh crap, like all the ways that I've defined myself are taken away from me right now. And I need to find something else or I'm not gonna do well. So the next basic psychological need is supporting competence. And this is the one that when I do work in the digital space, I actually find the easiest to support because so much of it rests on feedback and it's fairly easy to quantify things and reflect them back to people in digital. It can be harder in the real world and in interpersonal experience. One of the first things though that you can do to make people feel like they're competent, like they have ability, is to actually enhance that ability. And so 3 quick examples, 2 of them they're kind of the same thing. If you're familiar with nudge, which is kind of the popular science output of behavioral economics, there's this idea of opting in instead of opting out. So basically, as human beings, we look for shortcuts, especially mental shortcuts. We will do whatever's easy, and we're not always paying full attention to our environment. So if something's easy for us to miss, a lot of people are going to miss it. So for both organ donations in some countries and then 401ks in some companies, there's this idea of making them opt out instead of opt in. So typically when you're like getting your driver's license or whatever, you would have to check the box and fill out the paperwork and say, yes, I want to be an organ donor. That's an opt in and it's work. And so there are some people who just won't do it because it's work. It also makes you think about it, which research has shown is an issue too, because some people aren't super comfortable when they put a lot of thought into it. Well, in some countries, they've made it an opt-out where you are automatically an organ donor unless you say no. And in those countries, they have really high rates of organ donation. And they have more comfort with it too. That's a piece it's interesting. It's like almost if you don't think about it, you're just cool with it. But if you spend the time like pondering the grisly details of it, it becomes a little harder. 401k is similar. If you make it so that people automatically are enrolled in one when they get a new job, they keep it. They roll with it. And if you make it so they have to do all the paperwork, they're less likely to do it. An interesting thing here, though, sort of the dark side, making it too easy, is that the opt-out 401ks, the ones that you automatically get enrolled in, they also have an automatic enrollment amount. And research shows that a lot of people never change that amount. So you're really supposed to think about what percentage of your salary that you put into this account and maybe change it over time, depending on how close to retirement you are. And the folks who probably wouldn't have had a 401k at all are not doing that. So they're arguably still better off than they would have been, but it's interesting. It's like if you make it too easy, they maybe won't give it the reflection it needs later on. And then the third one is another one from my friends at ME Solutions about making it easy. And they've done work about making medical appointments like mammograms, where there's a predictable schedule. You get a phone call telling you, hey, you're due for your mammogram next fall. Hit 1 to be connected to your doctor's office. And when they add in that feature where you just have to hit 1, you get routed right to your own doctor's office, you get to make the appointment. They saw a huge increase in the number of appointments made and then follow through on actually receiving the mammogram. And it doesn't seem like a huge deal to have to be like, oh, all right, I'll remember to make the appointment and look up the number and make the phone call. But it's enough steps that people can forget along the way. And so making it super easy, automating it, really helps people with the follow through. So looking for opportunities to take these things that are important to do and making them as easy as possible, eliminating unnecessary steps. And then this is just an example from Onduo, which is owned by Google, by Verily. So it's just a diabetes management kit, but similarly, there's a ton of equipment that you need to participate in it. And they do this really nice sort of luxury experience where you get the box with everything you need and you open it up and like you have this great unboxing experience and all the instructions are there. So just thinking about when there's equipment or physical things that people might need to do, how can you make those materials really easy and in fact pleasurable for them to interact with? It makes a difference. Measurement's a really important part of changing people's behaviors, and part of it is because if you don't know where you're going, or if you don't know where you are, it's really hard to figure out where you're going. So, you know, I just took a workout class where the instructor was talking about that. Like, don't worry if this is just your first or second time and you're not doing super well, like that's going to tell you where you are so you know where you're going. And similarly with behavior change, figuring out where people are is an important first step. And in fact, just knowing where you are sometimes prompts people to change because we don't realize. Like, again, we're not always taking stock of ourselves and our behavior and its effects in the world. And so when we start to put numbers around things, it can motivate change just because we see where we are. And so this is some data from both diet and exercise, which are 2 areas that lend themselves to quantification. But people who track their food in diaries tend to lose twice as much weight as people who don't. And it's largely an awareness thing. This is not them being told to be on a diet. This is them told to track your food. And then, yeah, 18%, the second one here is people who are on a diet. They do tend to be more successful if they track their food. And again, it's just that awareness. And then people using pedometers, or a step counter of some sort, they tend to walk 27% more, take 27% more steps. And this is without having a goal to do so. So not only does measuring the way things are today help you understand so that you can measure the success of something you're trying to do, it can also just by itself motivate change. Another great way to give feedback is comparing people to reference groups. This is not a very sexy app name. It's called Drink Less, but it was rolled out in the UK, and it's intended for college students who want to drink less alcohol. And the specific thing that they noticed was that college students tend to believe that most other college students drink a lot. And the data isn't quite as bad as most people assume it is. So the drinking level is lower than most of these college students were assuming. And so the people who created it, they're researchers at University College of London. They basically just showed the data, the actual drinking data. And they'd say, all right, you're a 19-year-old woman who lives in this part of the town. And like, this is what the people around you are doing. And they found that accurate feedback helps people who want to drink less because it reduces the social pressure. This is a really, I like using the video game example, but I think video games do this particularly well. This is probably like, if I had to pick one thing about feedback that was really important, this would be it. And it's giving multiple levels of feedback. So focusing on the big picture and the near term at the same time. So this is from the video game Rock Band. And if you've ever played it, you know that you get multiple types of feedback at once. So you get the feedback on the notes that you've just played, and that happens in real time. You see the lights flash. I think some of the instruments even have the haptic feedback where the instrument vibrates or gives you, a sensation depending on how successful you were. And that gives you immediate information that helps you figure out how to do better on the next note. So that's really important, that sort of near-term feedback, because that's how we learn. And without that, we don't make the adjustments we need to do better. But this long-term feedback is also really, really important. And one of the reasons why is, when I talked earlier on about those big, hairy, audacious goals, the big things that people want to do in life that are maybe intimidating, or, they seem like they're so far away. One of the ways that you sustain momentum towards them is to look back and see how far you've come. And that's what this sort of feedback does. It also cushions the blow if people do not do well in the near term. So, again, I do a lot of work in health, and with dieting in particular, weight loss. When people are working on weight loss, if they're doing it right, it takes a very long time, and they're very likely to have plateaus where they don't lose any weight for a long time, or they may even gain weight. And to be able to say to someone in that situation, don't worry, you've still made a lot of progress. Like you're still on the road to where you want to go. It goes a long way toward helping them feel all right about the more immediate setback. So I see this as being one of the most important things that we can do for people, both orienting them to their most immediate behavior, but also thinking about that longer term big picture. All that said, one of the issues that sometimes happens with feedback is that there's just too much data and people don't know how to make sense of it. And so another thing that we can do as leaders, in my case as a designer, is help people cut through the noise. So one example here, this is a startup called MyMe that we did some work with. They are an allergy tracker. This is a situation I personally experienced, so I really appreciated seeing what they had done. So for people who have allergies and they can't figure out to what, it basically lets you track like everything that you come encounter with, everything you eat or drink, and the air quality and the activities you do and the fabrics that you touch and what you wash your hands with, all of that stuff, because you don't know what might be causing your symptoms. As you can imagine, that creates a mess of data, but then on the back end, they have an expert team who helps you analyze it and figure out which factors might be most likely driving your allergic reaction. So this is where they combine an expert with a system, a person with technology in order to help people. Another one that I really like, data shows that for folks who have lost weight and maintained it, the single most important variable is whether or not they weigh themselves every day. But most people don't weigh themselves every day because it's unpleasant. Our weight fluctuates a lot normally, like that's a totally normal, healthy thing. And there's a whole list of reasons why you might weigh 3 pounds or 5 pounds more tomorrow than you did today. But people get really, really hung up on the exact number, and then they don't they don't come back and weigh themselves again. So this is a product called Shape-A. Dan Ariely, who a lot of people have heard of, he's a behavioral economist out of Duke University, is one of the founders of this company. And the scale is actually that little circle there. It doesn't have a display on it. So you stand on it, you open your app, and you get a color. And what the color is, if you're a stats person, you have to baseline it for 10 days. And then after that, it gives you a Z-score against your last 10 days worth of data. So you're green if you are statistically the same weight as you've been. And then you're turquoise or blue if you're losing weight, and then a shade of gray if you're gaining weight. And so it's taking the noise out of that, that signal for you. And what they found is that people who use it tend to persist with it more, and they tend to actually lose more weight. So it's achieving the intended goals. Another thing I just want to briefly touch on is breaking that big goal down into smaller ones. And so one program that does it really great is Duolingo, if anyone's used that. It's a free language learning app. And, learning a language, that is really, really hard, especially if you're an adult learner, because our brains are no longer wired to acquire language that easily. So they do a particularly good job of helping you baseline. You can take, take a leveling quiz to figure out what your current level of knowledge is, and then it will tell you which lessons to start with. And then every lesson is fairly simple, and it builds on the ones before. So if you stick with it and do the lessons in order, everything follows kind of a logical progression where you're always at this level of challenge that is achievable. So Duolingo is a great example of how you can break down a big goal. But, in the junior league, there's a lot every year. Y'all are breaking down, think about something like planning a gala or the Bloom Bazaar. I mean, those are huge undertakings. And so part of the task of the people who are leading those endeavors is to break it down into much more manageable steps where people can understand what they're about to tackle and then also celebrate when they achieve it. Feedback for volunteers. So I was VP of communications a few years ago, and I have a particular soft spot for the annual reports, which are a pain to put together, but I think really rewarding in the sense that they reflect back what you've achieved. And what the Junior League achieves can be huge. I mean, you've got so many volunteers and so many women who are contributing from different places of talent and skill that when you bring it all together, it feels really rewarding and empowering to see it. So you see here, this is a screen cap from it was a 2014-2015 annual report. I recommend go to the website. You can see all the past annual reports. It's really, it's interesting from like a historic, I shouldn't say all in the last maybe 10 years. It's interesting from a historical perspective, but it's also, I think, empowering to see like, whoa, we did that. Like all those little things added up. And then, the Jeremiah program, this is from 2 years ago, I think, when we had the personal hygiene drive at the GMM. I mean, 2,500 items that went to participants in the Jeremiah program. That's a huge accomplishment. And, I know for my part, it felt like such a small thing. So to know that I can, run by 7-Eleven on my way to a meeting and be part of this huge impact is really empowering. And then on an individual level, this is, it's a little bit older, but from Digital Cheetah, like showing how people are tracking on their requirements, that can also be something that helps them feel like they're accomplishing something as they participate in these day-to-day activities that are part of the league. So key questions as leaders to think about supporting competence. How do you help members feel like their contributions are valued? How do you reflect back to them in your capacity as a leader or, as a citizen leader, that you see them and you see what they do and it adds up to something. And then how do you express that at the collective? So I'm personally a really big fan of stories and sharing stories. And I think there's a lot of power in sharing the stories of what you experience in your placement beyond your placement. I was mostly in internal placements, and I loved hearing about what was happening in the community because it helped me feel like there was an additional layer of meaning to my work that I didn't get to see most times. So those are the kinds of things that leaders can do to help inspire others. And then how do you highlight the positive effects, in the community for the league and for individual beneficiaries? You've got a lot of audiences that you're working with that you could potentially inspire, and a lot of opportunity there. So the last piece is about supporting relatedness. This is a sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. And I like this example. This is an actual set of screenshots from a video game that a researcher named Kip Williams, I think he's still at Yale University, put together. His research is on ostracization. So, deliberately shutting other people out. And it's an incredibly painful thing to experience. And he built this video game when he was first starting to study it. If you're playing it, you are the tiny hand at the bottom. And initially he told people they were playing with two others. They were just playing catch in a triangle. And then the two other players would stop throwing to the tiny hand at the bottom. They would ostracize him. And he found that the people who played this video game felt, really upset. They were angry. They had all these negative emotions and, just kind of a damaging experience, even though it was just a video game. So then he changed it a little bit and he said, you know what, it really is just a video game. There are no other players. It's automated. And he found people still had the same pattern of negative emotions, which I just find so powerful because it says that we're so sensitive to cues of belonging that even when we know cognitively that it's not real people, we still feel really hurt when we're left out. I like to emphasize that social media is just one tool for connection because I find that people hone in on it. It's such a part of the fabric of the way that we interact. And I think maybe even more right now where we don't have so many of our in-person things available to us. But social media, I would just say it's a tool. It's not really a solution in and of itself. And I think probably we all have experiences where social media has been used badly. Or, we've seen companies who put things out on social media and then never come back to them. And that can be a really negative thing because it's almost worse than if they didn't have it. Because if there is a social media presence, we have an expectation that it's going to be interactive. And if it's not, that harms things. I will say one thing about social media. These examples are from healthcare because again, I do a lot of my work here and healthcare people will a lot of times say, well, I can't really use social media because, it's so regulated and there's truth to that. But these are three examples. They're all pharma companies that I think have done a decent job at least having flashes of authenticity. Like you see, there might be a real person behind the account. So the first one is, honestly, it's a talk to your doctor, but the wording of it is more human. And I think just having it worded like a human being wrote it instead of like, I was going to say lawyers are human beings, but the drug, the drug warnings at the bottom where they're very boilerplate, very, very legalese, like this sounds like somebody said it more conversationally. And that goes a long way, I think. This person here who responded to Biogen and they say, thank you for sharing and being part of our community. There is no substance to that, but they're acknowledging somebody. They're saying like, hey, we appreciate you. And similar with the J&J one here, I worked for Johnson & Johnson for a number of years. And I will say as an employee, like them having the baby brand is one of the best things because it is so relatable and likable. And it gives you a hook that you can talk about that isn't as risky as some of the other healthcare products. But in all of these cases, this is like brands that are trying to be a little bit more human. These are two examples of chatbots, which is a really interesting thing out there. And they're very relatable. And so they do, both of these have really good actual outcomes associated with them. So ViviBot on the left was developed by a group called Hope Lab that's in San Francisco. And it was developed for teen patients and survivors of cancer. And they actually took a bunch of teen cancer patients on a week-long retreat in the woods and had them, do all these sorts of design activities and conversations, and basically came up with the personality and the language for ViviBot. So ViviBot reflects the way that this particular group talks, and it's a bot that's available for them when they want to talk about what it's like to have cancer. Because kids in that situation a lot of times don't know other kids who are in that situation. It's not super common. So they've sold this to a company called Grit Health, and it's had really good outcomes in helping teens with cancer feel like they're coping more effectively with that situation. And then the one on the right is called Wobot, and it's a free app you can download. It's just a little chat bot, and it's like super funny and cute, but it's intended to help people with mood and anxiety issues. And they specifically had in mind when they built it, young men. So adolescent men, early 20s, because in their research, they found that while women tend to have people in their life that they talk about feelings, about things that are hard, men a lot of times don't. And that's a really vulnerable age for them. So they created this chatbot that, it's lighthearted. It doesn't feel super heavy most of the time, unless you start to tell it things where they need to step up the approach. But they were like, this is a group of people who really needs to have the outlet. So I would encourage checking that out. And I think specifically a lot of what they do with gifts and just sort of the humor really makes it feel more approachable and help people feel like they have that relationship with it. And then of course, including friends. So there's a lot of apps out there. These are just three. Fitbit is probably the one most people would know on the right, where you actually socially connect with people. And then you are able to enjoy having them be part of your experience. Personalization. And actually, I will say one thing. I'll say this in a second here. These are three examples of technology that personalizes. So Google One, Siri, and Alexa, we're all familiar with those. And it's really easy, even though we know that they're machines, to feel like we're having a conversation sometimes. For me, it's mostly frustrated, like, I didn't say that. But we still slip into this pattern of feeling like they are another person instead of just a product. And that's because our brains are really wired for this connection. So Spotify is another program, that runs on algorithms, and it does a really great job of personalizing and particularly seeing something that is potentially unique about a person. I think the music apps, Spotify and Pandora, do this better than your Netflix, where they recognize things that maybe are a little bit quirky or unusual about somebody. And it's not just like, here's 30 Lady Gaga songs. They might remember that you liked a different artist who's a little bit more obscure and mix that in too. And I just want to say, in terms of sort of a leadership thing, a thing that happened to me really recently that was super nice. I gave a talk for a book club, and afterwards, to thank me, the leader said, we normally, like, we would have had you in person, and like, we don't really have a budget for this stuff, but like, we would have taken you to the pub. And she made me a Spotify playlist. She took a guess at my age, and she picked songs from when she thought I would have been 11 or 12. And she was like, I found that was my favorite, like my most formative music years. And so what I like to do is give for people what I think was probably formative for them. It was super sweet. Like, I really felt like, a connection that she had spent the time to do that. It obviously cost her nothing, but except for her time, but it made me feel really recognized. And it's something that I've shared with others. Like, if you do have an experience where you want to thank somebody for something and you don't have a budget to do it with an actual gift, or you're not sure what to do, something like this is offbeat and, memorable. Like, I thought that was a really nice way to kind of personalize and feel connected. She was wrong about my age though. Formal and informal connections matter. So these are two examples, again, from the league that I think are really nice ways of showing connection. So one is TLC as a service. I always thought it was one of the nicest things that the league does, where if you or someone has experienced a milestone, they'll send an acknowledgement to them. And at times it also gets published in various league publications so other people can be aware of it too. And it's just a nice way to feel like I have this community that sees what's going on, and as a member of the community, I get to celebrate what my other community members are doing. And then the circles are obviously a really great way to build those social connections. I imagine that those look very different right now, but I know that it was always a really nice way to experience that social piece that so many women want from the league. I also wanted to point out AJLI is a great resource for this. I had the opportunity to go to one of the AJLI conferences a few years ago, and really was surprised because I don't tend to be a very rah-rah person about some of this stuff, but I very much felt like part of a large, 4 countries, 290 different junior leagues around the world, over 125,000 women. You really feel that when you walk into one of those conferences. And I think even going on to the AJLI website can help reinforce that feeling that, you're not just by yourself, you're not just part of the Boston League, you're part of this international alliance of leagues, and, collectively really share a lot in common and are doing some amazing things. So key questions for leaders to support relatedness when you're thinking about this one. Like, first of all, how do you help people feel that connection to the community? And I think this question might be a little bit both harder and more important right now, because the ways that we normally connect they're different. So, how do you make it easy for people to talk to each other? How do you reach out and tell people, I see you and I'm here for you? How do you emphasize the position of JL Boston in the larger community? And that's another one that maybe is especially challenging right now. I think, at least over the last few years, one of the things that we've really talked a lot about is wanting to make sure that we are part of this larger fabric of Boston volunteer organizations, people who really care about what's happening to the girls of Boston. And, looking for ways to do that and to help members feel connected to that as well is really important. So I wanted to leave just with the question of, and I thought maybe this would be a good place to kickstart discussion of what are 3 things that you could do in the near term. I said next few weeks, it could be next few months, to better engage your fellow junior leaguers as a leader. And then the only thing I have to that is a picture of my book. I had to. So Anastasia asks that should we talk out loud or use this chat? I'm not sure what your norms are for the virtual trainings. One thing I've seen work well is people put a question in the chat box and then someone says like, oh, hey, Anastasia, you had a question. Why don't you unmute yourself and ask? We could do that.
It works for sure.
So yeah, I was just gonna speak up based on everything you just said. I am the chair for the gala this year, and I'm definitely trying to find ways to motivate everyone just from the get-go, so it doesn't seem like a weird switch halfway through the year. So what are some ways that anyone, especially you, would recommend for getting people engaged and feel like they're an important member from the very beginning, especially the new members?
Yeah, well, I do think the concept of taking the big, I guess your big goal here is, having a successful gala, whatever form that's able to take next year. I imagine that's part of what was tucked into that question there, is that you're not sure exactly what it might look like by the time the date rolls around. But breaking it down into all the different components that have to happen and letting, I don't want to use the word assigning necessarily, but matching each person with a set of those tasks so that they can contribute towards the greater whole, but really making it visible to people. I think that's sometimes where the miss happens. We always break it down into the smaller tasks. Otherwise, the gala wouldn't happen every year. But it's not always visible to everyone else what those tasks are or how people are participating in them. One of the things that was amazing to me as I got more involved with the league was starting to understand more of what goes into building those events. In my first year, it was sort of like, oh, gala magically happens. Like I saw some emails about it, but I didn't know anyone who was on the gala planning committee and I hadn't attended one yet. And so it was all a little bit of a mystery to me. But as I got to see what was behind the scenes and really understand that, like, especially the, soliciting donations and support is a really effortful process that makes a huge difference in what the event looks like. Scouting a location, finding the vendor partners, things like the band and picking the food and figuring out the theme and all that stuff. I think the more that, within the committee, you make it clear to everybody, like, this is your role and this is how it contributes. But then outside of the committee, these are the stories of what we're doing. Like, this is what's really exciting about being part of the gala committee. That can help people feel like their roles matter.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I see Pamela here saying one idea is to reach out and have dialogues about what each member of your team or committee wants to get out of the year. Do they have skills they want to develop or strengths they'd like to exercise? Absolutely. One thing that I think makes a big difference is if you are in a formal leadership position, if you're the chair of a committee, or you have another leadership position within the committee, is to actually make the time to do those kinds of things and have those conversations. I thought about not sharing some of those tools around figuring out like what matters to you. And the reason I left them in is because, as I said, I think there is a lot of space in the way that the league operates to either in a group setting or in kind of one-on-one conversations start to touch on some of those things. Because if you're able to do that, it can drive motivation over the course of the year. So yeah, and Sarah points out as well that, you can also start to notice some of their strengths yourself if you're taking the time to engage with people, especially early on. Can I talk a little bit about motivating from an informal position of leadership from Kelsey? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a little bit tricky because one of the things that you're doing, this is why I also said citizen leader. So when I was using the phrase informal leadership before, I really was talking about it in terms of social influence in the sense that we are all influential to each other. People are always looking around for cues as to what's acceptable behavior and what's tolerated behavior. And so in that way, we really form the environment we're in. I think if you've made the decision where you want to be more of a citizen leader, where you are specifically thinking about how to influence each other, this question is easier to answer. So I think one thing that I found is really helpful, and I'm thinking about myself at work even, I have a leadership job title, but on a given project, I may or may not be in a leadership position. And one of the things that I find is really helpful for me to do as a citizen leader in those circumstances is to reflect back to people what I'm noticing. So just today, the person who's leading one of the projects I'm on came back and said hey, the client's really happy with the work we're doing, congratulations to the team. And I made an effort to say oh, well, you specifically did these 3 things that were amazing as the project leader. And that's part of what he's responding to. So really taking the opportunity to notice positive things that other people are doing and reflect it back to them. And on the flip side too, if you have constructive feedback for them that you can offer in a way that feels supportive, that can be a really helpful way to do that as well. That's probably my biggest tip for it. And just, of course, because relatedness is such a part of it, and because we know that so many women join the league because they are looking for community and relationships, if it's in your comfort zone, really going out of your way to reach out and extend that friendly hand to people. And I think especially now too, where it's, you're not going to be in a room together, seeing somebody on the periphery, how can you send a friendly message on your group email? Or I don't know if there's, if you have a chat thread or something like that, engaging with those kinds of things just in a social way can help people feel that sense of community when they might really need it. Oh, there's 2 questions. So I've got Regina and Amanda, and I think they're similar questions actually. So the first one is, what do you recommend we can do to motivate a person when you've tried different approaches and can't find a way to get them engaged? And then can you talk a little bit about how to motivate those who fall into the controlled group? So that's really the same group of people, the folks who don't have that strong internal source of motivation, and they maybe aren't particularly interested in doing the behavior, or they just don't have that reason that's going to sustain them through the hard times. So as I said, my advice a lot of times is if somebody's truly amotivated, that you don't work that hard to engage them, because it is incredibly hard to do. You're not that likely to be successful, at least not quickly. And if you are thinking about a group experience, the time you spend on that amotivated person is time you're taking away from people who are more interested and more likely to be engaged and participating. So it's don't worry too much about it. But that said, I think you want to create the circumstances for them to have the opportunity to get more involved if something in their experience changes. So it's how do I create an environment that's welcoming to you, that's appealing to you? You make the decision whether or not you want to enter it. And if you decide not to, there's nothing I can really do about that except let you know that if something changes in the future, it's here for you. I think in Regina's question, and you're welcome to comment on whether I'm getting this right, but I guess what I'm hearing in the subtext is, someone who's maybe in your placement, who you're really trying to get them to participate in the way you need them to, when they're not following through, they're not doing it. And I've been in this situation. I typically find that if you can have personal conversations with people and try to dig in on some of that, why are you doing this? Why are you here? What really matters to you? What can we do differently about your role that helps you live in to the things that you care about more effectively? Sometimes that helps. I have had circumstances where it turns out that people have fairly fixable issues that are getting in the way of them connecting with the work. Sometimes it's just that something isn't a fit for them and they're going to white knuckle it through till the end of the year, and there's not a lot you can do. But I think clearing the space for that conversation, it helps, and at least gives you the tools to work with if there is something there to be done. So the other, I do have, I'll send the slides to Caitlin to share out, but I did put my email, this is my work email address, and it's my Twitter handle just because I used, bits and bobs of my work presentations to put this together. You're welcome to reach out to me. This email address is fine. But if you had questions or you were interested in chatting further about motivation, I'm happy to do that. And I see a question here from Hillary about podcasts or other books I recommend for understanding motivation. Yes, and actually I will include those when I send this document over because I've got a couple slides. But I'll say in terms of podcasts, my favorite ones for learning more about motivation and psychology are like not about motivation and psychology. Like I love a lot of the NPR podcasts like Hidden Brain where they'll have a topic and they bring in psychology to try to understand it, but it's not explicitly about psychology. I find that sideways approach is such a great way to learn. And similarly with, with books, I have a set of pop psychology books that I really like, but some of them don't even look like psychology books. So one that I really love is called Super Better by Jane McGonigal. And it's, really strong from a motivational science perspective, but it's about this game called Super Better that she created when she was recovering from a traumatic brain injury.
Amy, this was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much
for all of your time and all of your expertise. I just want to check in to see if anyone else has. Yes, the recording of the presentation will be posted. We're working on the platform for that, so it might be a week or two, but Katie and Shannon are going to have that available for everyone, and hopefully we'll be able to get the slides out to everybody in the next few days as well. Great. All right. Well, any last words from anybody else?